Excellent. Um, do you remember much of the curriculum that you studied in elementary school? Particularly, do you remember? Do you remember like what the history lessons were like?
Well, what I remember quite vividly in the first grade, I remember studying Ted and Sally. That was a little reader where we read about Ted and Sally and Boots and I remember that. I remember the second grade reader was We Are Neighbors. It was the name of the book. It had all these stories in it, and you'd have a story. At the end of every story, there'd be question, there'd be vocabulary words, and then there'd also be the vocabulary words would be spelling words. And so that's what I remember most vividly about those early grammar school years. And I remember my teacher, Miss Elise Wheeler, really kind of drilling us on vocabulary, on words. We would learn to read in elementary school it was almost like we would singing. We would sing the words as we read them. You had to read individually, you had to read as a group. There was spelling at almost the end of every day because she wanted you to be a good speller. And in early grammar school, there wasn't a lot of history. Say first, second, third grade, really, there wasn't a lot of history per se. But the books we had were books that came from the Fayette County schools. So they were the hand-me-down of the second-hand books that had been used in the Caucasian elementary school. So we had the same books and the same texts that we studied from. And our teachers would then augment that text, maybe during different times during the year where they would talk about some famous African American people. They would bring in magazines that had articles about African American people in them. But we did not have a curriculum of any real rigor or structure that really focused on African American history. It was just something that was kind of woven in by the teachers. And probably because they probably were forbade for doing it, I probably would think, because the curriculum was pretty much controlled by the Fayette County school system.
Could you tell me a little bit about the teachers, their credentials? Did you have anybody who you particularly looked up to a lot?
Brilliant, all of them. I tell people, I wish to my children, when they were going to school here in Charleston, I wish my grandchildren today would have had the privilege of attending the schools that I attended. Because I think the advantage that I had in Mount Hope, West Virginia in 1962 is that the best academic minds in the African American community were the females and the men who taught school. Particularly the females, because the African American females were pretty much barred from the professions. They couldn't become a doctor, they couldn't become a lawyer, difficult for them to become a nurse. And so it was considered to be a noble calling and a noble occupation to go into education. So the very brightest African American female and African American male minds, I believe, during that era and prior to that era, they went into education. And they were educated at the historically black colleges in West Virginia, either at Bluefield State College or West Virginia State College, which is now West Virginia State University, because for many years they couldn't go. That's the only place they could go. They couldn't go to Western University, they couldn't go to Marshall. So they were restricted to going to these historically black institutions. And so they had a tremendous pride about their education, and they felt that their profession was also a calling, and that the future of the black race would depend upon how effective they were in educating the students. So I had really three grammar school teachers. Miss Gladys Wheeler, I had her in the first grade, part of the second grade. And not because I was so smart, because I had siblings that worked with me all the time. So I completed most of the second grade work, so she put me in the third grade, the second semester of my first grade year. The second semester of my second grade year, she put me in the third grade. And then after being a half a semester in the third grade, they put me in the fourth grade. So then I settled in at that point. So I had her in the first and part of the second. Had her sister, Miss Anderson, part of the second grade. And then in the fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, I had one teacher, which I believe was the greatest educator I ever set before. and Miss Elise Watkins, because she made learning an absolute adventure, right? She had infectious enthusiasm. She had not had any biological children. She had raised one of her nephews as her child, but she had a great love for us, a great love for teaching, and she got excited about us learning. And I believe that she was an educational genius. And the reason I say that now, looking back, that there was no such thing as special education. Everybody who came to school was expected to learn. So whatever African American students in that community, they were sent to that school, and they were expected to educate them. By the time I got into fourth grade, there was at least 2 grades in each class, fourth and fifth. In the fifth grade, the fourth, fifth, and sixth grade were all together in one class. And that's when I look back on it now, I could see the genius of Mrs. Watkins, because she had let every student learn at the pace that they could learn at. So as a fourth grader, if I could do fifth grade work, I did fifth grade work where I could do fifth grade work. I did fourth grade work if I could only do the fourth grade work. And she was moving back and forth between the fourth, fifth, and sixth grade all day long, keeping us all busy, keeping us on task, but making sure that we were mastering the concepts that we had to learn. She was absolutely brilliant. And so then, after I completed my fifth grade year, when they finally closed W.E.B Dubois and they sent us all to Mount Hope Elementary School, well, my good fortune is that she landed a job as a sixth grade teacher in the now integrated school that we attended, and I was fortunate to get her as my fifth grade teacher. So she basically, really sort of guided my education, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. And then I didn't realize how well I had been educated until I got into seventh grade and went to school now with the brightest and the more affluent Caucasian students, and began to realize that I knew as much as they knew and knew some things they didn't know, because we were educated differently, particularly when it came to math. We were taught, I think, in a different way, which I believe that lended to me having a kind of an affinity and affection for math, because in my previous life I was an engineer, because of the love for mathematics, and science that Mrs. Watkins had instilled in me. So in 1962, when I started school, most of the children in the southern counties went to all Negro schools, particularly at the elementary level. Now, Charleston was more progressive than were some of the more southern counties. Charleston integrated pretty quickly down here. But if you go a little bit further south, you'll find that in 1962, more than half of all black children in the southern counties went to all Negro schools. Like counties like McDowell County, probably 75 to 80% of the children were still in all Negro schools, as Mercer, Wyoming. Raleigh may not have been as high, but still was pretty high. I think there were 18 all-Negro elementary schools in Fayette County when I started school in 1962. So they took the position, I don't know if it was easier, I'm not really sure why. The position was that they would not integrate or desegregate quickly at the elementary level. They integrated at the junior high level. There weren't middle schools then, there were junior high, 7th, 8th, and 9th. And there were high schools, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And the Negro schools had been 7 through 12. The junior high and high schools had been combined. 1st and 6th were together, and 7s and 12s were together. But as I look back on that, it was kind of interesting that when I started school, I had older siblings that were in junior high, and they were going to school to the integrated Mount Hope Junior High School, where myself and my sister was older than me, and my sister was younger, we were going to segregated W.E.B Dubois. But it didn't matter. It's not like we wanted to go to school with white people. I mean, that just wasn't the case. We were not itching to go to school with white. As a matter of fact, when I was in the 5th grade, I had a choice because they had started doing some more integration. And so, depending on where I chose to live, I put down as my address. So my mother was still living on McDonald Hill. So if I would have used her address, then I could have gone to either Du Bois or to Mount Elementary. If I used my grandmother's address, then I had to go from Stadium Terrace to projects. That was interesting, that they kept the kids in the projects going to the segregated school. I would have to go to W.E.B. Dubois. So by choice, and my mother let me make the choice, I used my grandmother's address because I wanted to continue to go to school for all black kids. That's just where I felt comfortable, and I was in no great rush to go to school with Caucasian. I felt like it would come soon enough, and I knew it would become when I got to the 7th grade.